The old map, brittle as parchment and scored with lines that no longer quite matched the modern world, lay across my passenger seat. Oakhaven. The name itself felt like a sigh exhaled from a forgotten crypt. I hadn't seen it in 2 decades, not since the last bitter argument with my grandmother had driven me away. Now, her cryptic death had pulled me back, a string tied to an anchor I thought I'd cut loose. The road narrowed, shedding its asphalt skin for cracked, ancient paving stones that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Trees, gnarled and skeletal even in the cusp of autumn, clawed at a sky the color of bruised plums. A mist, thin and spectral, began to weave itself through the branches, muffling the already scarce sounds. My own engine, usually a comforting growl, seemed loud, almost defiant in this encroaching silence. I crossed the rusty iron bridge, its grunting protest a solitary sound in the vast stillness. It wasn't just quiet, it was hushed as if the very air held its breath. The houses, weathered timber and gray stone, huddled together like frightened creatures, their windows dark, reflecting nothing. No children's laughter, no distant dog's bark, no hum of daily life. A sign, its paint peeled and faded, declared Oakhaven established 1792. A date, not a welcome. I drove slowly, the crunch of my tires on the gravel shoulder the loudest noise in the world. I saw no one, not a single soul tending a garden, or fetching mail, or simply sitting on a porch. The stillness was not peaceful. It was a profound, unsettling quiet that pressed in from all sides, a weight on my chest. My destination, the old funeral home, was a grand, Gothic edifice set back from the main street. I parked my car in what I assumed was the designated visitor lot, a small, open patch beside the building. The mist here was thicker, clinging to the brickwork, swirling around my ankles. The door, heavy and cowed, opened with a groan that echoed too long in the empty foyer. His face was smooth, unlined, and utterly devoid of expression, his eyes like polished river stones. "Cole," he stated, his voice a low, even murmur as if each word were carefully measured. There was no question in his tone, no warmth of recognition, just a flat pronouncement. "We were expecting you." "The funeral for my grandmother," I began, my voice feeling rough, unused. "I'm here to finalize the arrangements." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Of course." "She left specific instructions." He gestured towards a heavy oak door. "This way." I followed him down the hushed corridor. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like wilting lilies left too long in stagnant water. My grandmother, I mused, always one for the dramatic exit, but this felt different, even for her. This felt staged. We settled in a room dominated by a large, antique desk. The funeral director spoke in the same measured cadence, detailing costs and procedures. There was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the corner of his left eye, a flicker that betrayed a deeper, unseen current beneath his placid surface. I signed the necessary papers, my hand feeling heavy, my mind grappling with the unsettling encounter. As I stood to leave, he offered, "Your vehicle, Cole. It would be safer in the designated secure parking for the duration of your stay. The main lot here is exposed." My car, I thought, wasn't going anywhere, but the insistence in his otherwise flat tone was unnerving. "Where is this designated parking?" "Beneath the old marketplace. A short walk. I can provide you with directions and a key card." His instructions were meticulous, a series of turns down narrow, cobbled alleys I didn't remember. The mist had thickened further, wrapping itself around the streetlights, turning their glow into fuzzy halos. I drove slowly, the feeling of being watched intensifying with every turn. It wasn't a specific pair of eyes, but a pervasive sense, as if the very stones of Oakhaven held a collective gaze upon me. I found the entrance to the underground parking garage, a white concrete maw beneath what looked like a derelict municipal building. My headlights cut through the swirling vapor, revealing cracked pillars and dripping pipes. This was the foggy parking garage where footsteps echoed too long. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the vast, unseen expanse. The mist here was not just on the surface, it permeated everything, hanging like a shroud. I glanced over my shoulder, though I knew I was alone. A profound unease settled deep in my bones, a premonition that my grandmother's death was not an ending, but an unwelcome, terrifying beginning. The mist, a living shroud, pulled me deeper into Oakhaven's heart. I rounded another forgotten corner, the streetlights now just smudged blurs against the encroaching gray. The instructions, scrawled on the crumpled note, led me not to the old church grounds directly, but to a vast, shadowed maw in the earth, a subterranean parking structure. The sign above, barely visible through the swirling vapor, declared its purpose with faded, peeling paint. I steered the car into the gloom, the tires crunching on unseen grit. The air inside hung heavy and still, thick with the damp breath of the earth and the faint metallic tang of old exhaust. Each turn of the wheel sent shivers down my spine, the low hum of my engine swallowed by the cavernous space. I parked in a corner, far from the sparse, scattered vehicles that seemed to huddle together for warmth against the pervasive chill. As I cut the engine, a sudden, profound silence descended, broken only by the distant, disembodied drip of water somewhere in the concrete labyrinth. My own footsteps, as I moved away from the car, seemed to linger, each scuff and tap stretching into an unnerving reverberation that refused to fade, hanging in the stagnant air long after I'd taken the next step. It was as if the garage itself held its breath, listening. The funeral was a muted affair, held in the ancient stone church perched on the town's highest bluff. The stained glass windows, usually vibrant tapestries of light, were dull and smudged by the persistent mist, casting the interior in a perpetual twilight. A sparse congregation, perhaps 20 souls, dotted the polished pews, their faces, etched with what I initially took for grief, seemed oddly impassive, like masks carved from the same gray stone as the building. I sat in the front row, the only one to shed real tears, though even my own grief felt strangely thin, dulled by the pervasive strangeness of Oakhaven. After the brief, perfunctory service, delivered by a young clergyman I didn't recognize, the few attendees shuffled out, their movements slow and almost synchronized. "Cole, is that truly you?" A voice, thin and reedy, plucked at the frayed edges of my memory. "I heard about your grandmother. A quiet woman, wasn't she?" Kept to herself, my brow furrowed. Flat grandmother, he was anything but. Full of stories, always laughing, always tending her garden. Remember how she'd chase us from the apple tree with a broomstick, pretending to be angry. A blankness settled over his features, erasing the flicker of recognition. The apple tree. I don't recall that he was just quiet, always in the house. He paused, a strange, distant look in his eyes. Didn't she always wear that blue shawl? My grandmother owned many shawls, but a specific blue one wasn't a prominent memory. It was a small detail, easily dismissed, yet it pricked at me. He had a green one she loved, I offered, trying to anchor him to a shared past. Hand knitted. He just shrugged, the gesture devoid of any real thought. Perhaps my memory isn't what it once was. Later, at the small reception in the church hall, the encounters grew more unsettling. I approached a colleague of my grandmother's from the old textile mill, a woman whose sharp wit I remembered vividly. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Cole," he said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "Your grandmother was a diligent worker, always on time, always at her loom. She loved that mill," I agreed, trying to lead her. "Remember that big order for the summer festival? When she worked day and night to finish the tapestries, the whole town celebrated." Her head tilted slightly, like a bird listening to an unfamiliar sound. "The summer festival? I only remember the usual orders. No special tapestries. She just worked." Her gaze drifted past me, fixing on some unseen point beyond the window. "He was quite fond of the color gray, I think." Gray? My grandmother, whose home was a riot of color, whose garden bloomed in every shade imaginable, fond of gray. It was absurd. I tried another acquaintance, a distant relative who used to visit every Sunday for tea. "You remember those Sunday teas, don't you?" I pressed, a tremor of desperation entering my voice. "Her famous lemon cake. We'd talk for hours." The relative smiled, a polite, vacant curve of the lips. "Tea on Sundays? I don't believe so. Perhaps a brief visit. Now and then he was a private woman, wasn't she?" Kept to herself. The same phrase. Kept to herself. My mind reeled. It wasn't just individual forgetfulness. It was a shared, muted amnesia, a collective smoothing over of vibrant memories, replacing them with bland, uniform recollections. They remembered her, yes, but not her, not the woman I knew. It was as if a sculptor had taken a chisel to their minds, paring away the unique contours of experience until only a featureless block remained. The details they did recall were generic, almost interchangeable with anyone else. They was either one misremembering? Had my own recollections of Oakhaven, of my grandmother, been mere fantasies? The thought was a sickening plunge into self-doubt. Yet, the images in my mind were so vivid, so sharp, the scent of her lemon cake, the feel of her rough, calloused hand, the mischievous glint in her eyes as she pretended to chase us. As the last of the mourners drifted away, their footsteps almost silent on the polished floor, I remained. The mist outside pressed against the windows, a gray, formless presence. The townsfolk were not just forgetting, they were unremembering, and perhaps if I stayed too long, me along with it. The muted amnesia of Oakhaven clung to me like a shroud woven from forgotten years. It wasn't just the details of a face or the arc of a story. It was the very essence of her, my grandmother, that had been eroded from their minds, leaving behind a smoothed-over effigy. A sculptor, indeed, had taken a chisel, not to stone, but to the collective memory, leaving only bland, uniform recollections. The thought coiled in my gut, a cold, hard knot. I needed to return to her house, to the only place that still hummed with the echoes of her true self. But first, a detour. My car, laden with empty boxes and a toolkit, sat in the town's communal storage space, a vast, echoing concrete cavern. Each tread of my boots seemed to stretch, reverberate, then fade into the damp, chill air, as if swallowed by the very silence. The air here was heavy with the scent of mildew and exhaust, a metallic tang that pricked at the back of my throat. I felt an unsettling sense of exposure, as though the vast, empty space held unseen eyes, and my solitary presence was a disruption, an anomaly. I hurried to my vehicle, fumbling with the keys, the metallic clang of them against the lock sounding unnaturally loud, raw. I pulled out a stack of flat-packed cardboard boxes and a canvas bag of tools, the mundane objects feeling absurdly inadequate against the rising tide of my unease. Back on the street, the fog had begun its evening creep, blurring the edges of the ancient oaks that gave Oakhaven its name. It loomed familiar yet subtly alien, like a face seen in a distorting mirror. The porch swing hung motionless, a silent invitation to a past that felt increasingly distant. The key, cool and heavy in my palm, turned with a groan that seemed to resonate through the very timbers of the house. Sunlight, fractured by grime-streaked windows, painted muted stripes across the worn rugs and antique furniture, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the stillness. I started in the parlor, a room she rarely used, meticulously packing away porcelain figurines and tarnished silver frames. Hours blurred into a quiet rhythm of sorting and packing. I moved to her study, a smaller room overflowing with books, journals, and curious artifacts from her eclectic life. This was where she spent most of her waking hours, immersed in her endless research, her mind a vibrant, intricate tapestry that the town seemed to have forgotten. I began clearing the surface, stacking volumes on local folklore and cryptic mythology. Beneath a pile of loose papers, a small, intricate carving caught my eye, a stylized oak leaf, almost hidden within the desk's elaborate scrollwork. My fingers traced its contours, and with a soft click, a shallow drawer, cleverly concealed within the desk's facade, sprang open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single, leather-bound journal. Its cover was unadorned, the leather supple and worn smooth in places, as if handled constantly. No title, no author, just the silent promise of secrets. This, I knew, was what I had truly come for. I opened it carefully. The paper, thick and cream-colored, held the faint, sweet scent of aged vanilla. The initial entries were written in my grandmother's familiar elegant script, detailing mundane observations, garden notes, and local gossip. But as I turned the pages, the handwriting began to change, subtly at first, then more dramatically. The elegant loops became tighter, more hurried, slanting upwards at an anxious angle. Ink bled in places, as if pressed down with desperate force. Then came the symbols. Scattered between lines of increasingly fragmented text, they appeared, intricate, almost organic shapes that resembled twisted roots or perhaps veins. Some were stark, angular forms, others flowing and serpentine, unlike anything I had ever seen. They seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, a silent language of their own. The text itself transformed into a frantic outpouring, a hum in the earth, a song without sound. And then, the forgetting. It spreads, like moss on stone, eating the edges, the names, the faces. Us! My breath hitched. He had seen it, understood it, perhaps even fought against it. A particular entry, scrawled across 2 pages, seemed to scream from the past. They take the memories not to destroy, but to consume. To become our line, the keepers. But the pact breaks, the root stirs. It hungers for everything, for all of us. Keepers, my family. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of my eccentric, sweet grandmother with the frantic warnings of a dying woman grappling with an ancient, consuming entity. The journal ended abruptly, mid-sentence, with a final, desperate drawing of one of the root-like symbols, larger than the others, almost clawing its way off the page. The very air in the study seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of her unfinished fight, her unheeded cries. And I, Cole, now held it in my trembling hands. The ink-stained pages of my grandmother's journal lay scattered, the final, frantic symbol of intertwined roots mocking my comprehension. Keepers, my family. The words thrummed within my skull, a discordant symphony of terror and impossible truth. My hands trembled, not with cold, but with a deep, unsettling vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. The small, rented room felt suddenly vast, its familiar corners stretching into ominous angles. A breath, thin as a spider's silk, brushed my ear. I flinched, whipping my head around. Nothing, only the stale air of the room, the scent of old paper and dust. It was not a sound I could pinpoint, more a sensation, a vibration in the quiet. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them, scanning the periphery of my vision. There, a fleeting darkness, a ripple in the shadow cast by the window frame, gone before my gaze could fix upon it. The revelations of the journal had not just unsettled my mind, they had opened some unseen aperture. The world, once merely peculiar, now hummed with an insidious, unseen life. I gathered the journal pages, my movements stiff as if the air had thickened around me. Oakhaven, beneath a sky the color of bruised plums, felt profoundly different. The usual quiet of the streets, once a gentle lull, now pressed in with an almost physical weight. I walked toward the general store, a place I had visited almost daily since my arrival, a small anchor in the shifting strangeness. The storekeeper, a stout woman with an apron perpetually dusted with flour, usually greeted me with a nod and a muttered comment about the weather. Today, the bell above the door chimed, and she merely looked up, her eyes wide and blank, then returned to stacking tins of preserved fruit. Her usual sharp gaze, the one that missed nothing, was absent gone. "Good morning," I offered, my voice feeling strangely loud in the hushed space. She blinked, slow and deliberate. "Morning, Cole." His voice was flat, devoid of its usual warmth. I browsed, my eyes darting between the shelves and the woman, searching for a sign, a flicker of recognition in her gaze beyond the automatic pleasantry. I then noticed the empty space behind the counter, where the young delivery assistant, a lanky boy with a perpetually smudged face, usually stocked shelves or swept the floor. He was always there. Always. Where's the assistant today?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. The storekeeper paused, a tin of peaches hovering in her hand. Her brow furrowed, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor passing through her. "Azza," she murmured, as if tasting a foreign word. "There's always been just me. The boy had been here only 2 days ago, complaining about a splinter." I remembered his bright, eager eyes, his nervous laugh. Now, he was simply unremembered. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just fractured memory, it was outright erasure. I left the store quickly, the bells chiming like a mocking laughter. The structure was an anomaly in Oakhaven, built decades ago for a proposed industrial complex that never materialized, now mostly abandoned, a skeletal reminder of failed ambition. It was like walking into a sound vacuum, where every noise I made was amplified and distorted. And then I heard it, distinctly this time. It wasn't words, not yet, but the implication of language, like 1,000 mouths breathing secrets into the damp air. They were like holes in the fabric of reality, not solid, but absences that moved. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I felt watched, not by a single pair of eyes, but by a diffuse, collective consciousness. The entity. It was here. It was everywhere. I moved deeper, driven by a desperate need to find something, anything, concrete. My eyes scanned the grimy floor, and then I saw it, a small, wooden toy truck, painted bright red, half buried in a thin film of mud and dust. It was the same truck the storekeeper's assistant had proudly shown me just a few days prior, describing how he'd carved it for his younger sibling. A splinter still clung to one of its tiny wheels. I knelt, my fingers trembling as I reached for it. The boy hadn't just been forgotten. He had been taken, and this small, carved toy, a forgotten relic in a forgotten place, was the only proof he had ever existed. The entity was not just erasing memories, it was erasing the people themselves. And I, Cole, the outsider, the one who remembered, was standing in its way. They might forget, but I wouldn't. I couldn't. Always been just me. The words, echoing from the forgotten boy, still clawed at the edges of my hearing, a phantom shriek in the quiet of my own skull. The chill that had speared me in the general store had not receded. It had merely settled deeper, a cold knot tightening beneath my ribs. This wasn't just the town's memory fraying at the edges, it was a deliberate erasure, a meticulous scrubbing of existence. The boy, his splinter, his bright, eager eyes, gone, wiped clean from the collective slate, leaving only my own fragile recollection as proof he had ever been. The thought was a raw wound, bleeding a terror I hadn't known possible. I gripped my grandmother's journal tighter, its worn leather a small, solid comfort against the growing weight of the unseen. The faded sketch, a crude rendering of what looked like an ancient mill, accompanied by a cryptic string of symbols, was my only lead. I had to find it. The houses, once vibrant with the imagined lives within, now seemed to press in, their windows like vacant eyes watching my departure. The drive to the outskirts of Oakhaven was a slow descent into desolation. The paved roads gave way to cracked asphalt, then to gravel, and finally, to a barely discernible dirt track overgrown with tenacious weeds. The trees, once a welcoming canopy, now clawed at the sky, their branches skeletal against the pewter twilight. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and stagnant water. It was a smell that clung, a shroud of forgotten things. And then, through a veil of weeping willow branches, it appeared, the mill. It was less a structure and more a monument to rot. Timbers, once proud and sturdy, sagged inward like a collapsed ribcage. Every window was a gaping maw, shattered glass sparkling like frozen tears on the ground below. I cut the engine, the sudden quiet of the car deafening after the rumble of the old motor. My breath plumed in the cold air as I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots like dry bones. This was the place. Pushing through a gap in a sagging wooden fence, I approached the main entrance, a cavernous opening where the massive loading doors had long since rotted away. The threshold was a carpet of leaves, decades of decay compressed into a spongy mass. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a vast, cathedral-like space filled with the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery. Gears, cogs, and belts, once vibrant with purpose, now lay draped in thick shrouds of cobwebs, like forgotten mourners. Thus motes danced in the light. Tiny, frantic spirits. My gaze swept across the walls, searching for any sign of the symbols from the journal. The rough-hewn timbers were scarred by time, by damp, by the gnawing teeth of insects. A low groan from somewhere deeper within the structure made me freeze, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It was just the wind, I told myself. A gust finding purchase in a broken pane, but the sound seemed to linger, a sigh from the very bones of the building. Not wood, but stone. A section of the wall, oddly smooth, stood apart from the rough timber, almost as if it had been built later or revealed. And there they were. They were crude, yet imbued with an unsettling power, like glyphs from a forgotten nightmare. They seemed to writhe, to unravel, to suggest a labyrinthine complexity beyond simple lines. As I studied them, comparing them to the journal, a particular sequence of symbols, slightly deeper, more defined than the rest, caught my eye. My grandmother had circled them in her journal with a shaky red pen. Following their direction, my light played over the stone, and I noticed it, a faint seam, almost imperceptible, running vertically down the wall, just beneath the final symbol. I pushed harder, bracing myself, and with a grinding, protesting groan that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the old mill, a section of the wall began to pivot inward. A narrow, uneven passage, carved directly into the bedrock, descended into the earth. The walls were rough, the ceiling low, barely clearing my head. It was a maw, a gaping throat leading to an unknown, unimaginable interior. I stood at the threshold, the air heavy with an impending doom, the path before me an invitation to it unraveling. This was a truth, unvarnished and cold, that had burrowed into the marrow of my bones, and it demanded an answer. The answer, I knew with a dreadful certainty, lay beneath. My flashlight beam, a frail spear against the encroaching vapor, danced across peeling paint and rusted rebar, seeking the anomaly, the crack in the facade. An old, heavy grate, long rusted into immobility, had once sealed it, but now lay twisted and broken, a testament to some forgotten force. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I stepped through the broken grate, my boots sinking into loose, damp soil. The descent was immediate, a steep, uneven, curved crudely into the earth. The tunnel narrowed, the rough-hewn walls closing in, their damp surfaces slick beneath my fingertips as I braced myself. Earth and stone pressed close, a claustrophobic embrace that stole the very breath from my lungs. I felt the weight of the mountain above me, a silent, crushing presence. The passage snaked, twisting back on itself, a labyrinth fashioned by hands or forces unknown. My flashlight beam became my only guide, picking out glistening veins of moisture on the rock, the occasional root snaking through a fissure. The smell intensified down here, not just the damp earth, but a deeper, more organic scent, like old blood and fermentation, mingled with something sickly floral. My light struggled to pierce the gloom, revealing only fragments of its immense scale. The air here was still and heavy, carrying a faint, resonant hum that vibrated in my chest. Strange, intricate carvings marred the far wall, abstract patterns that seemed to writhe and flow, depicting no recognizable figures, only an unsettling geometry of lines and curves. Beneath these markings, arranged in a crude circle, were a collection of blackened, brittle bones, dried, flaky remnants of something organic, like pressed leaves but thicker, more fibrous, clung to the stone, brittle to the touch. The air around me suddenly felt charged, expectant. It was an obscene, glistening growth, the size of a large boulder, its surface a mottled, sickly gray, shot through with thick, purple veins that pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat like a monstrous heart. A low, wet thrum emanated from it, a sound that resonated not in my ears, but directly in my chest, a deep, primal vibration that made my teeth ache. The sickly sweet scent I had noticed earlier was strongest here, a cloying, suffocating perfume that filled my nostrils and threatened to overwhelm me. This was no geological oddity, No strange fungus. This was alive. This was consuming. This was the entity, made manifest, a feeder no drawing sustenance from whatever lay buried here from the very memory of this place. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the sheer, undeniable reality of it. My hand trembled, the flashlight beam wavering, reflecting the tremor in my soul. I was no longer merely investigating. I was trapped in its presence, utterly, terrifyingly real. The cold, that dread certainty, had guided my steps through the whispering streets, past the skeletal trees, to the maw of Oakhaven's hidden underbelly. My grandmother's cryptic end, the town's fractured mind. It all funneled to this moment, to this descent. The vast space swallowed the meager light from the street lamp behind me, leaving only a pervasive gloom. A chill, sharper than the evening air, snaked around my ankles. The fog wasn't merely atmospheric. It clung to the concrete pillars, swirling like restless spirits, obscuring the far reaches of the garage in a milky haze. My boots scraped against the gritty floor, and the sound, instead of dissipating, seemed to stretch, to multiply, bouncing off unseen surfaces with an unnerving persistence. It was as if a dozen invisible companions walked beside me, their phantom steps mimicking mine. My pulse quickened, a frantic drum against my ribs, betraying the calm I tried to project. A low hum, a vibration more felt than heard, thrummed through the soles of my feet. It was a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to originate from beneath the very foundation of Oakhaven. Following the almost imperceptible slope of the floor, I moved deeper, the fog thickening until it obscured my outstretched hand. At the garage's farthest edge, where the concrete met raw rock, a jagged opening yawned. It wasn't a man-made entrance, but a fissure, a tear in the earth's crust. I hesitated, a tremor running through me, but the pull was undeniable. It wasn't curiosity, not anymore. I squeezed through the narrow gap, the rock scraping against my jacket, and tumbled onto a damp, uneven floor. The hum intensified, a silent roar in my bones. Here, the air was heavy with the scent of wet stone and something else, something akin to ozone and stale breath. My flashlight beam, a fragile spear against the overwhelming gloom, cut through the cavernous space. The walls, slick with moisture, seemed to writhe in the dancing light, revealing strange, ancient striations that were almost too regular, too deliberate to be natural. The cavern opened into a vast chamber, far larger than I could have imagined. And then I saw them. They stood in a loose circle, perhaps 30 or 40 individuals, facing inward towards a pulsating, organic mass that rose from the cavern floor. The mass rippled gently, like a vast, submerged lung. The townsfolk. I recognized some of them. The old shopkeeper who always had a kind word, the librarian whose spectacles perched perpetually on her nose, the young clerk from the general store, even the gruff fisherman whose face was a roadmap of the sea. Their eyes were open, yet vacant, glazed over with an unnerving stillness. Their bodies were relaxed, almost slack, swaying with an imperceptible rhythm that mirrored the soft undulations of the central mass. No one spoke, no one moved with intention, yet I could feel it. A silent symphony of thought, a discordant harmony of fragmented memories and raw emotions. It was a cacophony that bypassed my ears and reverberated directly in my mind. Fleeting images flashed through my awareness. A child's laughter, the warmth of a summer sun, the sting of a forgotten sorrow, the scent of burning leaves. These weren't my memories, but they were present, hanging in the air like motes of dust, coalescing and dissipating. They were sharing. No, not sharing. They were feeding. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The entity, the pulsing heart of this subterranean horror, was not merely existing. It was consuming. It was drawing the very essence of their lives, their pasts, their identities, into its silent consciousness. Each fragmented memory, each stray emotion, was a nutrient absorbed into the vast, growing mind beneath Oakhaven. And then I felt it. Join us, Cole! The thought was not my own, yet it resonated with an insidious familiarity, a promise of release. It offered solace and escape from the burden of remembering, of fighting, of being me. My own memories, precious and vital, flickered, suddenly vulnerable. A warmth, not unpleasant, began to spread through my chest, urging me forward, toward the circle, toward the pulsing heart, to surrender, to become part of the vast, silent consciousness that was Oakhaven's true, terrifying ruler. The pull was intoxicating, a siren song promising oblivion, and for a terrifying moment, I yearned to obey. The scent was the first assault, not of damp earth or stale air, but a cloying sweetness, like forgotten blossoms decaying in a sealed room, laced with something metallic and sharp, like old pennies. It clung to my clothes, to my hair, even as I descended deeper into Oakhaven's hidden maw. The passageway narrowed, the stone walls pressing in, slick with a perpetual, unseen condensation. Then came the whispers, not auditory sounds, but a felt presence, a soft, insistent murmur against the inside of my skull. It spoke of peace, of surrendering the jagged edges of self, of dissolving into a vast, tranquil sea. It was an insidious lullaby, a siren song for the mind, promising an end to all striving, all pain. I fought it, a desperate, silent struggle against a current that threatened to pull me under. My grandmother's face etched with a fierce, defiant intelligence flashed before my eyes, a tiny anchor in the encroaching tide. I saw them, figures, indistinct and shimmering at the periphery of my vision, standing utterly still, their forms barely differentiated from the gloom. They were the townspeople I knew, or what was left of them, each a silent, unmoving testament to the entity's slow, deliberate consumption. Their eyes, or where their eyes should have been, held no light, no individual spark. They were husks waiting to be fully absorbed. The understanding struck me with the force of a physical blow. It didn't want to kill. Death was too crude, too finite. It sought to erase, to unravel the unique thread of each consciousness, to weave it into its own boundless, nameless fabric. My grandmother hadn't died a natural death. He had been fighting this erasure, trying to sever the connection before it claimed her entirely. This was a hunger for identity, a slow, methodical devouring of memory and self, leaving only a serene, collective emptiness. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, to sever myself from this encroaching peace. My breath hitched in my throat, ragged and loud in the overwhelming quiet. The climb felt endless, my muscles screaming, my mind a battlefield between the entity's insidious invitation and my own fierce will to exist. I burst from the hidden opening, gasping, into the raw, biting air of the night. My legs burned, my lungs ached. But I didn't stop. The concrete ramp stretched before me, vanishing into the swirling mist, each of my ragged breaths puffing out in white clouds. The sound of my shoes striking the ground reverberated unnaturally, each thwack stretching, drawing out into a phantom echo that seemed to follow me, a ghostly accompaniment to my escape. The entity wasn't a monster of teeth and claws, but a predator of the soul, a silent architect of oblivion. It wasn't about blood or gore, it was about the quiet, terrifying theft of everything that made one me. My grandmother's meticulously organized notes, her coded journals, her cryptic diagrams. They weren't just the ravings of a paranoid old woman. They were a map, a weapon. He had understood this enemy. He had sought a way to sever its connection, to cut it off from Oakhaven, to starve it of the memories and identities it craved. The details were still hazy, obscured by her scientific shorthand and esoteric symbols, but a central theme emerged: resonance. She spoke of frequencies, of a counter-vibration, something that could disrupt the entity's insidious hum, shatter its hold. He had found a specific location, a nexus point deep beneath the town, where the entity's influence was strongest, where its roots truly burrowed. If that connection could be broken, severed at its source, the collective might unravel, releasing its captives, freeing Oakhaven from its slow, silent death. The task ahead was monumental, suicidal even. But looking back at the shrouded town, its lights a sparse, unsettling glow in the fog, I knew I had no choice. I was the last individual memory Oakhaven had, the last thread of resistance. My grandmother's legacy wasn't just a warning, it was a blueprint. I would not let her sacrifice, nor Oakhaven's essence, be silently erased. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was set. I would return. I scrambled back, away from the suffocating presence that thickened with every downward step. The cloying sweetness, like blossoms rotting in formaldehyde, and the sharp tang of old copper pennies clung to me, a shroud woven from Oakhaven's decay. My throat burned not from exertion, but from the air itself, heavy and wrong. I had seen enough, felt enough. A chill, not of temperature but of dread, had rooted itself in my marrow. The whispers I'd heard down there, not voices, but a resonance in the very stone, had been a promise of oblivion. Surfacing into the twilight, the town felt different even from a few hours ago. The air was still, unnaturally so. Sound seemed muffled, absorbed by the deepening haze that now seemed a permanent fixture, not just of the weather but of the very atmosphere. They were not merely distracted, they were gone. Their individual threads unraveled and were woven into a larger, uniform tapestry he had known, he had fought. And in her scribbled notes I hoped lay the key to Oakhaven's liberation, or at least a weapon against its encroaching demise. My mind raced, sifting through faces, memories of laughter, of arguments, of shared meals. Who among them still held a fragment of their former self? Who could I reach before they too were swallowed whole? I needed a place, a momentary reprieve from the town's unnerving stillness. My frantic search led me, by some instinct, to the periphery of town, a forgotten corner where the old mercantile district met the docks. The air here was cooler, damp, smelling of concrete and stagnant water, a welcome reprieve from the cloying sweetness that still ghosted my nostrils. Each step I took sent a ripple of sound through the cavernous space, a lonely, elongated tap-tap-tap that seemed to hang in the air, a testament to my isolated presence. The fog, thick and swirling, tasted of metallic dust, obscuring the few derelict vehicles that stood like forgotten monuments. Her handwriting, once so precise, had become frantic, almost illegible in places. Pages were filled with observations of the town's slow decay, the emptying of eyes, the loss of song. Then, a section caught my eye, underlined multiple times. Almost gouged into the paper, the weaver feeds on the forgotten threads. It builds its loom from absence. But memory is a knot it cannot untie. A vibrant, defiant knot. It shies from the sharp edge of remembered joy, of remembered sorrow. The old ways, the remembrance, it was not just a story. It was a shield, a weapon. The heart of Oakhaven. The true heart lies not in stone or earth, but in the echoes of its people. And a locket of lost echoes, a conduit. It focuses the stray currents, the remembrance, a ritual, not a physical fight, but a battle of minds, of souls. It all clicked into place, a horrifying, yet strangely hopeful mosaic. My grandmother hadn't just been documenting Oakhaven's demise. He had been researching its salvation. I emerged from the garage, the journal's revelation burning in my mind. The remembrance required an active, conscious act of recalling, of feeling. But how could I ignite such a spark in those whose memories were being systematically devoured? I saw the shopkeeper standing by the closed door of his store, his gaze vacant. "Mr. Davies," I called, my voice echoing in the too still air. He turned slowly, his eyes like polished stones. "Do you remember the summer festival? The fiddler's tune? The taste of the elderberry pie?" I flicker, a faint tremor in his jaw. Then, it was gone, replaced by the same placid emptiness. He merely tilted his head, a gesture devoid of curiosity, and turned back to his door. This wasn't going to be easy. I tried again, with the baker's wife, a woman who used to hum old folk songs while kneading dough. "Mrs. Albright," I pleaded. "Do you remember the lullaby you sang to your daughter? The one about the moon and the willow tree?" She paused, her hands, once deft and flower-dusted, now hung limp at her sides. She continued her slow, aimless stroll down the street. The entity's grip was tightening, its invisible tendrils weaving tighter around their minds. Each attempt felt like chipping away at a granite monument with a spoon. Yet, the journal had spoken of vibrant, defiant knots. There had to be some who were more resistant, whose memories were too deeply ingrained, too potent to be easily consumed. Perhaps those who held on to a singular, powerful memory, a shard of pure, unadulterated emotion. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a macabre beauty. I could almost hear the entity's vast, hungry hum, a silent vibration that sought to flatten all individual thought, all unique experience. But my grandmother's words were a counter-melody, a defiant drumbeat in the quiet. The locket of lost echoes. That was the next step. It wasn't just about remembering. It was about focusing that remembrance, amplifying it, turning it into a weapon. The time for caution was over. Oakhaven was not merely dying. It was being unmade. And I, Cole, the last thread of my family's line, was all that stood between its complete erasure and a desperate, fragile hope for its fragmented soul. The locket, the image of the townsman's placid gaze, that fleeting, unsettling ripple of what once was, had etched itself behind my eyes. It was a brand, searing away any lingering doubt. The time for observation, for quiet deduction, was over. I had seen the vacant eyes of Oakhaven long enough. Now, I needed to look into the void that had claimed them. My jaw ached with a resolve that felt brittle, a fragile shield against the creeping dread. I found the entrance where the old maps hinted, a forgotten service ramp leading down beneath the oldest district. The air grew immediately heavier, thick with the scent of damp concrete and something else, a faint metallic tang, like distant static electricity. Headlights, long dead, stared out from skeletal vehicles, their chrome dulled by time and the pervasive moisture. I moved through the spectral aisles, my breath pluming like a ghost ahead of me. The silence was profound, yet it felt weighted, expectant, as if the very air held its breath. I felt eyes on me, not human eyes, but the collective, unblinking awareness of something vast and deep. My skin prickled. It was the sound of a sleeping leviathan, stirring. The parking garage gave way to a series of crumbling tunnels, their walls slick with mineral deposits and ancient grime. The hum intensified, a deep, pervasive bass note that seemed to resonate with the very marrow of my bones. It felt like walking into a massive, living cavity. The air grew warmer, humid, carrying a faint, cloying sweetness that made my throat tighten. The tunnels twisted, narrowing, then opening into vast, echoing caverns. Then, I saw it. It filled the cavern, a vast, organic mass, shimmering with an internal light that shifted between hues of deep violet and ethereal gray. It wasn't solid, not entirely. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate expansion and contraction that sent a wave of psychic pressure washing over me, stealing my breath. This was the entity, the silent devourer, the core of Oakhaven's oblivion, and within its shifting form, I saw them, countless, indistinct motes of light, each a fragmented memory. They swirled, coalesced, then shattered, a kaleidoscopic dance of lives unlived, stories untold. This was the collective consciousness, the stolen essence of generations. It was magnificent and horrifying, a living tapestry woven from the threads of human experience, consumed and repurposed. Joint memories, not my own, began to flood my mind. The scent of a pipe tobacco I'd never smelled, the sting of a betrayal I'd never known, the joy of a wedding day that wasn't mine. It was overwhelming, a cacophony of borrowed lives threatening to drown my own. My head swam, my knees threatened to buckle. This was the struggle, not with fists or blades, but with the very fabric of my being. I focused, clamping down on the chaos, trying to find a purchase in the swirling maelstrom. My own name, my grandmother's smile, etched deep, vibrant, the sting of the sea's salt on my tongue, a memory of childhood summers. I clung to them, these anchors, these truths of my existence, as the entities sought to unravel them, to weave them into its grand, silent tapestry. It intensified its assault, the fragmented memories growing sharper, more insistent. I saw my own life, twisted, distorted, juxtaposed with the lives of 1,000 others. My father's face, suddenly alien, replaced by the features of a stranger. My own reflection in a window pane, shifting, blurring, becoming faceless. I felt my identity fraying at the edges, my sense of self dissolving like sugar in water. But a spark, stubborn and defiant, ignited within me. This was not peace, it was oblivion. This was not unity, it was consumption. I pushed back, not with a thought, but with a raw, primal surge of will. I focused on the memory of my grandmother's last, cryptic note, the one that had drawn me back to Oakhaven, the one that hinted at a deeper truth. It was a memory of resistance, of a mind that had fought. I projected it outwards, a shard of dissonant thought against the entity's harmonious hum. I didn't know if it would work, if a single mind could wound a collective, but I had to try. I poured my defiance into that memory, forcing it into the shimmering mass, a stone thrown into a still pond. For a moment, the entity seemed to recoil. The pulsing light flickered erratically, the violet and gray shifting with a violent urgency. A ripple, like a spasm, ran through its vast form, and the psychic pressure momentarily eased. It was a jolt, a jarring discord in its silent symphony. I felt a surge, a tug of quickly followed by searing pain behind my ears as the entity retaliated. It wasn't a physical blow, but a targeted strike at the very core of my identity. 1,000 phantom voices screamed my name, twisting it into an accusation, then a threat, then a plea. My head throbbed, my vision blurred, and the taste of bitter ozone filled my mouth. I stumbled, clutching my temples, fighting to maintain my tenuous grip on reality. I had wounded it, but it had wounded me in return, leaving me teetering on the precipice of my own undoing. The tendrils of thought tightened, luminous and chilling, probing the fragile architecture of my mind. Not claws, but whispers, a chorus of forgotten voices yearning to merge, to reclaim the scattered fragments of Oakhaven's consciousness. My own memories flickered, insubstantial as candle flames in a gale, threatened by the onslaught of alien experiences. I saw flashes of the town's first settler, the grief of a young mother losing her child to the sea, the quiet joy at a harvest festival centuries past. They weren't just images, they were sensations, emotions, an entire tapestry of lives woven into the vast, silent consciousness that sought to claim me. A gentle, insistent tug pulled at my core, a seductive promise of peace, of an end to the arduous burden of self. It was a beacon, a defiant spark. No, my own voice, thin and reedy, echoed not in my ears but in the cavern of my being. No, I fought, not with strength, but with a desperate assertion of me. I clutched at the specific, the mundane, the precious, the scent of my grandmother's lavender sachets, the worn texture of my childhood blanket, the sharp tang of salt air on my tongue. I pictured the ancient root system beneath the town, the one I'd glimpsed in the tunnels, the throbbing core of this parasitic intelligence. I imagined a fracture, a searing bolt of pure, unyielding self ripping through its delicate, interconnected web. The entity recoiled, not with a shriek, but with a soundless tearing, a psychic rending that reverberated through my skull. A wave of pure, undiluted chaos washed over me, a cacophony of disjointed thoughts and emotions that were too vast, too raw to process. The tendrils snapped back, withdrawing into the deep, leaving behind a profound, aching emptiness where they had been. I collapsed, gasping, the world spinning around me. My body felt heavy, alien. When I pushed myself up, my legs trembled, and a metallic tang coated my tongue. The air, once thick with the entity's presence, now felt thin, desolate. Each of my steps reverberated, the sound stretching, echoing, then fading into an unnatural quiet that felt heavier than any noise. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and the world seemed muted, Colors softened, edges blurred. I pushed through the garage's heavy door, emerging into the muted light of Oakhaven. The town was different. I heard disjointed murmurs, fragments of conversations that began and ended abruptly, like radio signals cutting out. A woman, the baker I recognized, stood by her shop window, her hands fluttering to her face. Her eyes held a flicker of recognition, then a profound confusion. She looked at her own reflection, then back at the street, as if trying to piece together a puzzle whose central image was missing. A group of townsfolk gathered near the old fountain, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and dawning, painful awareness. I saw the mayor, his usual confident posture replaced by a slump, staring at his own hands as if they were unfamiliar. He muttered something, a name perhaps, then shook his head, a spasm of frustration crossing his features. The collective memory had been disrupted. But the aftermath was not a triumphant return to normalcy. It was a trauma. Some memories had indeed returned, but they were not whole. They were shards, sharp and bewildering. People remembered something but struggled to connect it to everything. There were gaps, vast, terrifying lacunas where entire experiences, entire relationships, had simply ceased to be. A profound weariness settled over me, deeper than any physical exhaustion. The echoes of the entity, the vastness of its attempted assimilation, lingered within me. I felt the faint, ghost-like touch of those forgotten lives, a constant reminder of the near oblivion. The victory was costly, bought with the shattered minds of Oakhaven's inhabitants. I stood there, watching them, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The choice was stark, a chasm opening before me. Or I could stay. It would be a long, arduous task, a life dedicated to tending to wounds that might never fully heal. But to leave felt like another kind of surrender, a betrayal of the flicker of individuality I had fought so desperately to preserve. I closed my eyes. The image of my grandmother's defiant face burned into my mind, and felt the weight of a decision that would define what remained of my life.